Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Ambassador Ischinger. And to all of the very extraordinary leaders who are here today, I thank you for the kind introduction and your years of dedicated leadership. And thank you also to Chancellor Scholz for your kind words. So it is an honor to join all of these distinguished leaders from around the world this morning. I am certain we all recognize this year's gathering is unlike those of the recent past. Not since the end of the Cold War has this forum convened under such dire circumstances. Today, as we are all well aware, the foundation of European security is under direct threat in Ukraine. Let us remember, from the wreckage of 2 world wars, a consensus emerged in Europe and the United States. A consensus in favor of order, not chaos. Security, not conflict. So by forging relationships and bonds, forging organizations and institutions, laws and treaties, we together established a set of rules, norms that have governed ever since. And Europe has enjoyed unprecedented peace, security, and prosperity through a commitment to a set of defining principles. The United States is equally committed to these principles. That people have a right to choose their own form of government. That nations have a right to choose their own alliances. That there are inalienable rights which governments must protect. That the rule of law should be cherished, that sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states must be respected, and that national borders should not be changed by force. We are here in Munich together to reaffirm our commitment to these principles. These principles have brought us peace and security. The backbone of this, of course, is NATO, the greatest military alliance the world has ever seen. As a defensive alliance, we have deterred acts of aggression against NATO territory for the past 75 years. And today, let me be clear, America's commitment to Article 5 is ironclad. This commitment is sacrosanct to me, to President Biden, and to our entire nation. In fact, I am joined here in Munich by a bipartisan delegation from the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. They are Democrats and Republicans. They have a wide range of political views, but they stand together in recognition of the value and the importance of our NATO alliance. Now, even in the most difficult times for our transatlantic community, and even when our system has been tried and tested, we, the United States and Europe, have come together and demonstrated our strength and our unity, just as we do today. As we stand in this decisive moment with all eyes on Ukraine. As we have said all along, there is a playbook of Russian aggression. And this playbook is too familiar to us all. Russia will plead ignorance and innocence. It will create false pretext for invasion, and it will amass troops and firepower in plain sight. We now receive reports of what appears to be provocations, and we see Russia spreading disinformation, lies, and propaganda. Nonetheless, in a deliberate and coordinated effort, we together are, one, exposing the truth, and two, speaking with a unified voice. As President Joe Biden has made clear, the United States, our NATO allies, and our partners have been and remain open to serious diplomacy. We have put concrete proposals on the table. We have encouraged and engaged Russia through NATO, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the United Nations, and bilateral dialogues. We have engaged in good faith. Russia continues to claim it is ready for talks, while at the same time, it narrows the avenues for diplomacy. Their actions simply do not match their words. And let me be clear, I can say with absolute certainty, if Russia further invades Ukraine, the United States, together with our allies and partners, will impose significant and unprecedented economic cost. We have worked intensively with many of you in this room to ensure we are prepared to move forward with consequences. We have prepared together economic measures that will be swift, severe, and united. We will impose far-reaching financial sanctions and export controls. We will target Russia's financial institutions and key industries. And we will target those who are complicit and those who aid and abet this unprovoked invasion. Make no mistake, the imposition of these sweeping and coordinated measures will inflict great damage on those who must be held accountable. And we will not stop with economic measures. We will further reinforce our NATO allies on the eastern flank. In fact, together, we have already taken steps to strengthen our deterrence and collective defense. We have deployed an additional 6,000 American service members to Romania, Poland, and Germany. We have put another 8,500 service members in the United States on a heightened sense of readiness. As President Biden has said, our forces will not be deployed to fight inside Ukraine, but they will defend every inch of NATO territory. Since Russia launched its proxy war against Ukraine nearly 8 years ago, the people of Ukraine have suffered immensely. Nearly 14,000 people killed, more than 1 million displaced, and nearly 3 million in need of aid. The United States has provided significant support to Ukraine, security assistance, humanitarian assistance, and economic assistance. And we will continue to support the people of Ukraine. I believe it is important for us, all of us, as leaders, to never forget the cost of this type of aggression on human lives, and livelihoods. So, the United States, our allies and our partners, together we have achieved remarkable unity. It is evident in our shared acknowledgement of the threats, our united response, and our determination to uphold international rules and norms. In the face of Russian aggression, I have been reassured and heartened by the widespread agreement across the transatlantic community that these rules and norms will be defended. And we should not lose sight of how rare it is in history to have a prolonged period of relative peace and stability. So let the past few months be a reminder to us all. Defending the rules and norms, upholding our principles, this is the vital work of each generation. In recent years, some have questioned whether the West is up to the task. Some have wondered whether this system can endure. Some have done so even on this very stage. Indeed, the theme of this conference 2 years ago questioned the staying power of the West, whether or not the transatlantic community was losing its cohesion, its influence, its appeal. So I will answer the skeptics and those seeking to test us. Today, the United States, our allies and our partners are closer together. Today, we are clear in our purpose. And today, we are even more confident in our vision. Our strength must not be underestimated, because after all, it lies in our unity. And as we have always shown, it takes a lot more strength to build something up than it takes to tear something down. Thank you all.
Madam Vice President, thank you so much for this great speech, which I think will be commented about and read about quite a bit in coming hours and days and weeks. Before we start our conversation, let me repeat what I said before you came into the hall. It was in 2009, President Biden, who established, having just been elected Vice President at that time, a young tradition, namely that the United States would be represented in Munich by the Vice President. And he came several times, and I was delighted to see that even the Trump administration followed that example. And we're now so happy to have you to continue this tradition. And I would be delighted if you convey to the President that even if he is now no longer the Vice President, he has always a standing invitation here.
Yes, Ambassador, I will, and I will tell you it is the President's enthusiasm about the importance of this conference that led to my enthusiasm to be with you this afternoon, so thank you very much.
Now, on a slightly more serious note, a year ago, when the President appeared on our screen, actually in this room, I was standing right here in this room, when he appeared on screen, and he said, and I quote, "America is back, the transatlantic alliance is back." Now, that was a message that was extremely well received here, even if not all of us knew that we would be threatened in the way that we feel threatened right now, as you just explained. But as we look forward, there are lots of people here in Germany, in Europe, who are asking themselves, okay, America is back, that's great, but is it for good? Is this for good? Many in Europe are fearful of a time where maybe some kind of a second Trump could be looming in the future. So here's my question. What can or should we Europeans do to keep the United States engaged in Europe long term? Not just today as we sit here, and even beyond the current administration. I think that is such an important question, because we have learned over these last weeks and months that without the United States considering herself a European power, we're actually quite powerless.
I think the evidence of the point that I will make is present in this room. You will see there is probably one of the largest delegations from the United States Congress present today, Republicans and Democrats, who, as I said earlier, often don't agree on much, but agree on this. I think that the heart of your question really does demand the importance of the perseverance and enduring nature of institutions and alliances. And I would say that on that point we are strong. There is an unwavering commitment to NATO and to the alliance, as evidenced again by the conversations and the unity that has resulted over the last several months, where nations have come together, where the United States, we would like to believe, has been among leaders in playing a leadership role to bring together the allies around common principles and norms, doing it in a way that has been at its essence about the value and the strength of diplomacy, which is about direct engagement. We have counted, and the Secretary of State is here, Tony Blinken, we have counted in excess of at least 200 conversations just in the last couple of months, be it between the President and others, the Secretary of State, myself, and so on. So I would say to you that the relationship is strong, and that the importance of the relationship is something that we take very seriously, which is why in this historic moment, in this defining moment, potentially, the strength of the institution and the alliance reveals itself, even if there's been a question about that before.
Thank you so much. Now, another key theme of our special edition with President Biden a year ago was this question, and I'd be interested in your response today. The question was, can democracies prove that they can still deliver better solutions to the world's major challenges than autocracies? There are skeptics who would probably not have a hard time finding evidence to the contrary over the past period. What do we need, what do democracies need in order to do better and to convince our peoples that we can do it?
Ambassador, I think this is one of the most challenging issues of our time, which is the relative strength, the question about the relative strength, efficiency, and effectiveness of democracies versus autocracies. I'm going to always bet on democracies. I think all of us here share that in common. And it is a reflection of, again, the principles that we have that include the importance of being a government that reflects the needs and desires of the people through a process that has integrity, that rejects corruption, and embraces the concepts of equality and freedom. When we look at the challenge that we face now in the United States, and you are right, President Joe Biden talks a lot about this, and we take pride in the fact that the strength of a democracy, one measure of that strength will be, does it deliver on the needs of the people? So, for example, in the United States, again, with thanks and with great attribution to the congressional delegates that are here, we passed a bipartisan infrastructure law that was one of the first in generations that will deliver on the needs of the people. So I would say that the strength of democracies and the way that democracies will prevail, one measure of that will be, does it actually deliver for the people? But that being said, there is a duality that is always present, I believe, which is that democracy is both, it both has the characteristics of strength and fragility. Meaning that it is incumbent on each of us to understand the strength of democracy to deliver for the people, but also the fragility of democracies, which is that if we are not vigilant, if we don't fight for the principles, then they can fail. And so that, again, brings us to the reason that we are here today, to continuously reaffirm and rededicate ourselves as a community to the strength of democracies and the need for us to not only individually but collectively uphold its principles, its values, and its purpose.
Thank you very much. Now, I think I have no choice but to return to our overriding theme this weekend, which has been when Secretary Stoltenberg spoke earlier and Chancellor Scholz spoke just before you. Of course, the central theme was, and you talked about it just a few minutes ago, was Ukraine. So the Biden administration, the president himself, you've all stated that you expect that there will be some kind of military action by Russia going forward. Now, I have no question about your determination to do what you announced to do. But I think this audience would be interested in how you and the Biden administration judges our readiness. Do you think we Europeans are sufficiently prepared for such a kind of a worst-case scenario, which would, in my view at least, which would tend to sort of, terminate the search for a durable and peaceful European security architecture? And we've been working on that for more than a generation, for 2 generations. So the question is, if you could reflect a bit about how you think about this and what conceivably Americans and Europeans working together, what we could do in the future even better in terms of speaking with Russia, not only about Russia. One of the things I really regret is that the Russian government decided not to come here. I would have appreciated an opportunity to challenge them on the stage, as has been the case for many years here in Munich. But I think you understand my question.
Well, as I said in my speech, I am reassured and heartened by the work that we have collectively done over the last several months. And it is work. Not everyone started out in the same place in terms of a variety of issues that are on the table. How do we define aggression? What should be the consequences? Which consequences are appropriate? Which are we willing to pursue? Which aren't we willing to pursue? So we didn't all start out in the same place, but through diplomacy, and again, this speaks to the strength of diplomacy, we came together and are now speaking with a unified voice. And that voice was a function of not only dialogue, but debate, some concessions, but also a practical realization of the moment that we're in, which is that we are looking at a sovereign nation that may very well be on the verge of being invaded yet again. And perhaps this is a moment, as life does present us, with those moments that challenge us to ask, what is our reason for being? And I think we all know the history of NATO and its reason for being. the spirit behind this term we use, the transatlantic community. The word community meaning a collection, not a collection of individuals who see themselves as a collection than as one. And that's where we are now. I don't disagree with you that it would be nice if we were presented with other circumstances, be it at this conference or in the world, but that's not where we are. We remain open to diplomacy. We have said it continuously, and our deeds, our words, and our actions have reflected that priority. We believe that when you define the strength of any nation, certainly I'll speak for the United States, we believe it is an expression of our strength to seek, as a first priority, a diplomatic resolution to any conflict. And I believe we've been clear about that. But yet we are presented with this moment today. And so the question is, if that diplomacy leads to a dead end, we hope it does not. I said that again in my speech today. The President said it last night. We are still open to a diplomatic resolution. But if it does not, we are also clear-eyed that there must be consequences. And so we have clearly articulated the consequences we have in store. And they will be severe and swift. And they were derived through a process, again, of diplomatic discussions and engagement, wherein there has been some consensus around what would be appropriate, given perhaps some predictable scenarios. I think this moment speaks to, yes, a moment we would like to avoid, if it was avoidable, but it also speaks to our resolve to speak with one voice, in a unified voice. History has challenged us over the years in that regard, but I think history will show that at this moment, we are standing strong.
Madam Vice President, I can only thank you on behalf of our participants, of this audience, and of those who are listening from the outside, for traveling, for coming over here in these difficult circumstances with pandemic conditions. You know, under more normal circumstances, there would be like 600 people in this hall. It would be totally overcrowded. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for doing this for us here in Europe. It's an enormously reassuring message. And I want to invite all of you to offer to the Vice President of the United States a warm round of applause, if you could, please.
So that was Kamala Harris on the international stage at the Munich Security Conference 2022. You are watching BR24 Live. And joining us live once again is Thorsten Teichmann, our US correspondent. Thorsten, so great to have you back again. This has been a very clear and strong speech Kamala Harris just gave, right?
Yeah, the U.S. side in the conflict with Russia stays on the script and repeats its talk and saying that they are open for diplomacy, but in case diplomacy fails, they also have severe consequences for Russia in case Russia again uses its military to incurse into the Ukraine. So in this case, the clear messaging is there. She repeated it. She again reiterated that to work together with the Europeans is of very high importance here in Washington, D.C. I think it was very interesting to see Ischinger asking her what the Europeans can do better, and also whether the U.S. USA stays for good as a partner for the Europeans? That's a very difficult question to answer. We have elections here in this year for Congress, and then looming already the next presidential elections. A lot of talk about Trump running again. So the question was fair there. She said that Democrats and Republicans came to this conference to Munich, and that should be a sign that institutions and conferences persevere. But I think the question still is there, is the engagement that the US shows currently in the current crisis, is it for good and will it stay?
Torsten, Kamala Harris had several high-profile trips as the US has partnered with key allies in an attempt to deter Russia from invading Ukraine. How important is her being here today?
I think she's there on behalf of the president, and it was a very important speech for her. You have to see that she has a wide portfolio, mainly here in the US, about social justice. She has a portfolio about dealing with the border issues. A lot of people still migrating from Middle America in South America to the United States, and the solution is not found for the very dire situation at the border to Mexico. And she has this really wide portfolio here, which is dealing with domestic issues. So on the international front, she's sent to Europe to have this message of the Americans that first, it is in the American interest to work together with their European allies, and second, to have a strong message against Russia in the current Russia crisis around the border of Ukraine. And I think that she's there just shows the high stake that we are talking about. I mean, we always can talk about what is the interest here of the different partners or the different contraries in this crisis. But I think it shows that the work that Europeans and Americans want to do together is underlined by her visit to Munich.
The US and Europe reunited, and it feels so good. That actually could be the headline of this conference so far, or what do you think, Torsten?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, they're showing that they're working together on all kinds of levels. But then again, Europeans and Americans are also facing the same challenges. I mean, Kamala Harris was speaking about a rule-based system in Europe. And then we heard yesterday Mr. Guterres saying that we have a moral bankruptcy of the financial sector, that we have inequality in this world, that we have poverty in this world. All those problems we're facing together, the US and Europe. And maybe this should be addressed as well, not just the primary security concern that we have currently right now with Ukraine and Russia, but also the underlying issues. And rule-based is fine, but rule-based should work on every level, not just the political and security level, but also on other levels. And maybe there our societies in Europe and in the US can share a lot about what is working and what isn't so good working.
The US is very invested into this situation, one could say, because the US and Europe are standing strongly together. But one could also ask, is it because the US is under the impression Europe couldn't handle it all by itself?
I think the impression of the current Biden administration, and I think the Secretary of State Blinken yesterday said it, is that no country can handle the current challenges by itself, not even the US. I think this was his words. So I think the challenges globally are so huge that the perception that one country can be on itself, a perception that we got from the former administration, who were thinking that if you have a power sharing, then you're losing power. So you have to be on yourself. You have to be strong yourself. I think this perception or this idea is not the idea of the Biden administration. It's not so much that Europe can't handle itself. It is more that all the countries in the world have to work together to come to a solution. I think that's very clear from here.
Torsten, after the election in the United States, especially here in Germany, you didn't hear much from the Vice President Kamala Harris. How is she viewed in the States?
Yeah, that's very difficult to come to a clear conclusion here, because she is also in this kind of culture war. So we have one side of the country in the United States that make her days hell, and the other side really are fond of her and support her. And so it's very unclear to say where she stands in terms of people in the United States. I think there is some disillusion about how much she can move. I think there was big expectations, being her the first black woman, being her the first woman with South Asian descent, and so the family is from South Asian descent. So I think the expectations were very, very high, and there might be some people who are saying, oh, we expect much more, that she's much more influential here. But again, there's also quite a culture clash here. When we look at the news, programs like CNN, MSNBC will support her. Programs like Fox News do their money with bashing her. So I don't come to a clear picture where we stand right now in the perception of the Vice President in the United States.
Thank you so much, Torsten. For now, we have to move on because the stage is set for Wang Yi, China's State Councillor and Minister of Foreign Affairs, here at BR24 Live with the Munich Security Conference.
Say the same thing about our big neighbor to the east, about Russia. When Minister Wang last addressed this room in 2020, being here physically, it was under the difficult circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, which had just started to dominate the international discourse. Unfortunately, I'm sure I'm not the only one who regrets today that we are not yet totally out of the woods regarding the pandemic, and the circumstances do not permit Minister Wang to join us in person. I think there is also, of course, the Olympic Games still ongoing with, I'm sure, lots of international visitors that he wanted and he needs to say hello to. Instead, he's joining us today virtually and will also be willing to respond to a few questions within the tight schedule that we have. Now, if you guys are not fluent in Mandarin, use your headsets. And I would now want to say thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Thank you very much, State Councillor, for spending time with us today. And you have maybe not the floor, but the screen. Please.
接下来把时间交给您，谢谢。
很高兴再次见到一新阁主席，我的老朋友。我也很愿意通过。
Well, thank you, Chairman Ishinger, my old friend. It is very nice to see you once again.
这几年冬奥会讨论最多的话题就是不确定性。今天的焦点。
I'm delighted to attend the Munich Security Conference once again and to meet with old and new friends on the cloud. In the past few years, the most frequently discussed topic at the MSC was uncertainty. And this year, it has been replaced by a sense of helplessness. All this reflects the deep confusion among nations about the current state of the world, as well as their widely shared concern about its future. Secretary-General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, cautioned expressly many times that the world is at risk of division, and major countries are expected to shoulder their responsibilities and live up to international obligations. As China sees it, this warning is no alarmism. Indeed, our world faces once again the danger of division and confrontation. Certain big power is reviving the Cold War mentality and stoking confrontation between blocs. It willfully wields unilateral sanctions and undermines international rule of law. It puts together various circles and stirs up antagonism. It gets zealous about decoupling and building walls and acts against the trend of globalization. It boasts of its strength and power and glorifies hegemony and bullying. This should not be allowed to continue because it runs counter to the advancement of history. So what shall we do? The answer lies in greater solidarity and cooperation under the banner of multilateralism. As President Xi Jinping highlighted at the World Economic Forum earlier this year, Amidst the raging torrents of a global crisis, countries are not riding separately in some 190 small boats, but are rather all in a giant ship on which our shared destiny hinges. Only when countries row the oars together and cheer up each other, rather than undercut and come after one another, can we overcome the current challenges and sail into a bright future. In this process, the role and action of major countries are critically important. Let me share with you 3 points. First, to make the world a better place, major countries must lead by example. President Xi Jinping has stressed time and again that major countries should act like major countries. We expect all major countries to take the lead in supporting multilateralism, living up to their international commitments, acting on the purposes of the UN Charter, and contributing to world peace and development. China has all along been taking real actions to honor its international responsibilities and obligations. Facing the persistent global pandemic, China has acted on President Xi Jinping's announcement to make vaccines public goods and was among the earliest to provide vaccines to countries in need. It has so far provided over 2.1 billion doses of vaccines to more than 120 countries and international organizations. At this moment, we are focusing on providing new, large-scale vaccine assistance to Africa. Facing the sluggish global economic recovery, China has put actions behind the vision of common development. It has worked to advance high-quality Belt and Road cooperation for green, open, and clean development under the principle of high standard, people-centered, and sustainable progress. Facing the impact of COVID-19 on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, China has put forward the Global Development Initiative and called on all countries to take actions together and lend fresh impetus to the realization of the agenda. Facing the complex governance challenge, China has taken an active part in developing global governance systems on climate, environment, health, and in the digital sector, and worked to make globalization more open and beneficial to all. It has been a staunch stalwart of the international system with the United Nations at the center and the international order based on international law. Facing the volatile global landscape, China upholds the new vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security and has worked for political settlement of regional hotspot issues, playing a constructive role in maintaining international peace and security. Facts have proved that China's development has increased certainty in the world and expanded the force for peace. China, with higher quality development and better capability to deliver, will provide stronger impetus for global recovery beyond COVID and greater contribution to international peace and stability. Second, to make the world a better place, countries must work in sync. We need to work together for a new type of international relations based on mutual respect, equity, justice, and win-win cooperation. State-to-state relations should not be simplistically defined by competition only, and no country should be obsessed with turning back the wheel of history and repeat past mistakes of forging rivaling alliances. We need to work together to champion and act on true multilateralism. The authority of the United Nations must be guaranteed, and the purposes and principles of the UN Charter must be upheld. No country, not even a superpower, should replace international norms with its own will, still less put itself above international norms. We need to work together to promote balanced and robust recovery of the world economy. What is urgently needed is further openness and integration, not isolation and decoupling, and to remove trade barriers, bring down exclusive yards with high walls, promote open, green, and common development, and foster and maintain an open world economy. We need to work together to safeguard global peace and tranquility. Security of a country should not come at the expense of that of another country, and security of a region cannot be realized by beefing up military blocs. The idea of exclusive security and absolute security must be rejected. We all must guard against and oppose any attempt for new Cold War and strive for a world of enduring peace. Third, to make the world a better place, China and Europe must play its part. China and Europe are two major forces and great civilizations. We can and we must provide more stability and positive energy for the world. The two sides need to stay committed to the China-EU comprehensive strategic partnership and should not be swayed by any turn of event. China will continue to support European integration, support an EU with greater unity and prosperity, and support European strategic autonomy. At the same time, we hope that Europe could move forward from the partner, competitor, rival characterization of its relations with China, focus on the mainstream of dialogue and cooperation, stick to the keynote of mutual benefit, and view the China-Europe relationship from a strategic and long-term perspective to ensure the overall direction of a healthy relationship. The two sides need to respect each other's core interests and adhere to the basic international norm of non-interference in international affairs. Given the differences in our history, cultural background, and development stage, it is natural that we do not always see eye to eye with each other. China is ready to, on the basis of mutual respect and equality, enhance dialogue with the European side and seek common ground in spite of the differences and find a mutually acceptable path forward. The two sides need to expand mutually beneficial cooperation across the board. China and Europe are linked by highly complementary development edges and a cooperation foundation built over the years. We should look beyond the pandemic to unlock further potential and room for cooperation and give substance to our partnerships for green and digital cooperation so as to bring about greater possibilities and sustained momentum for China-Europe relations. Dear friends, the Olympic Winter Games Beijing 2022 is drawing to a successful conclusion. I wish to take this opportunity to express my hearty appreciation to all those who have warmly supported and participated in the Games. The success of Beijing 2022 is an accomplishment for China, and even more so for the world. The Games, which attracts the eyes of the world, not only brings warmth and hope to people of all countries who are caught in the chilly winter of the pandemic, but also injects the much-needed strength of peace and unity into this volatile world. Together for a shared future. This is the official motto of the Olympic Winter Games Beijing 2022. As we have seen in the field of play, even the strongest contenders can compete peacefully and cheer for one another because their goal is not to beat others but to surpass themselves. The same spirit should also ring true when it comes to relations between states. In this spirit, China is ready to work with all countries as passengers in the same boat and with unity as the sail and cooperation as the oar, sail through the pandemic and toward a brighter future. So these are my opening remarks. Thank you. And now I'm ready for communication and exchanges with Chairman Ishinger and all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. And we already have a couple of questions. If I may, I will start with a question that I had thought about, but I also already have more or less the same question from Josh Rogin of the Washington Post. This is on my tablet. So allow me to read the question. 2 weeks ago, President Xi and President Putin attracted a lot of attention with the joint statement they made. And in this joint statement, I quote, "The two sides oppose further enlargement of NATO," unquote. Now, Mr. State Councillor, of course, NATO can only enlarge if a country wishes to join. Now, considering that national sovereignty is, as you just explained, one of China's key principles, why should a sovereign country not be free to join an alliance if it so chooses? And to use the words that Josh Rogin used, which go in the same direction, President Xi says China's foreign policy is based on non-intervention and sovereignty. So why would China not speak up clearly against Putin making threats against Ukraine a UN member state also. So here we go.
Well, Chairman Islinger, I expect that the first question from you would be about Ukraine. First of all, let me reiterate that the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of any country should be respected and safeguarded, because this is a basic norm of international relations. It is consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, and it's the consistent position of the Chinese government. Ukraine is no exception. In the document that the Chinese government has released in the past, there is repeated commitment to safeguarding sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all countries. If anyone wants to question this position of China, it is ill-intended hyping up and sensationalization, and it is a distortion of China's position. When it comes to NATO, China's position again has been consistent. We always believe that the Cold War has been long gone. NATO was a product of the Cold War era, and now we need to look at the current situation, and there needs to be adaptation to NATO. If there is a persistent easternwards expansion, will that really guarantee peace in Europe? Will that truly lead to lasting peace and stability in Europe? I believe that this is a question that our friends in Europe need to have serious consideration about. At the moment, regarding the situation surrounding Ukraine, there is a lot of discussion. China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. We always make our decisions on our position based on the merits of the issue, and we always play our due constructive role. When it comes to this issue, we believe that now we need to go back to the initial solution of the Minsk agreement, because that agreement was reached by all parties related to this issue, which is a binding agreement. It has been endorsed and recognized by the UN Security Council. It is the only way out for the Ukrainian issue. As far as I understand, the Russian side supports the new Minsk agreement, and for Europe, it also supports this agreement. Recently, U.S. Secretary General, the Secretary of State of the United States, Tony Blinken, called me, and he told me that the United States also supports this agreement. If that is the case, why can't all parties sit down together to have in-depth discussion and to come up with the roadmap and timetable for the implementation of this agreement? I believe that this is what all parties need to focus on. Instead of hyping up tensions, stoking panic, or even sensationalize or trumpeting the risk of war, at this moment, all countries need to shoulder their responsibilities and work for peace.
Thank you very much, State Councilor. I want to remind the audience
About the prospect of this issue, I have a view that I want to share with all of you. Ukraine should be a bridge linking the West and the East, and should not be a front line for major power competition. When it comes to this issue, all parties have the right to raise their concerns. While the reasonable concerns of Russia should also be respected and heeded. So we hope that a solution can be found through dialogue and consultation that will really guarantee security and stability in Europe, and a framework leading toward the solution can be found by all parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, State Councillor. I just want to make clear that our technology does not allow me to take oral questions from the audience. So if you want to ask a question, use the chat room function, and then I can read it, and it works. Then it works. So I'm waiting to get more questions. While in the interim, Mr. State Councillor, let me add the following question, which I've been asked, but which I share personally, because I happen to be a licensed ski instructor, so it's one of my hobbies to follow the Olympics, and I've tried to do that over the last week or so quite intensely. Due to the popularity of the Olympics, a lot of attention has been paid to China internationally, and many around the globe have now learned about the fate of the Uyghurs and allegations about labor and re-education camps for this minority in China. So a question that has been suggested to me is this: when will, or I should maybe say, will UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, have unrestricted access to this region in order to try to verify such allegations? Thank you.
First of all, let me say very clearly that in Xinjiang there has never been the so-called systematic forced labor or the so-called re-education camp. These are all lies that have been fabricated and spread as disinformation. I hope you can believe that the Chinese government and you can trust what the Chinese government say and what we have been releasing. So what is this matter is truly about? Well, Xinjiang is a place where it has been intensely hit by violent terrorist forces and radical ideologies. In the past few years, Xinjiang was severely threatened by these threats, and some terrorist forces infiltrated into the Xinjiang region. So in order to protect the security and safety of the local people, the local government needed to take actions to strike down on those forces. It has responded to the call of the United Nations, and it has drawn on the experiences and actions and practices of France and other countries, and it has used education to de-radicalize so that the breeding ground for extremism can be removed. This approach has paid off, and it has been supported and welcomed by people of all ethnicities in Xinjiang. For the past few years, there has been no single terrorist attack in Xinjiang. All people in Xinjiang, including the Uyghur people, can live in peace and can live happily. And Xinjiang has been thriving in its economic and social development. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that a contribution made by China and by the Xinjiang region to the international fight against terrorism? Isn't that a useful exploration of preventive efforts against terrorism? I believe that this should be fully recognized not only by the Chinese people, but also by the international community. As to the lies and misinformation, Xinjiang has opened its door, opened its arms to people in other parts of the world so that they can find out the fact. Let me share with you that before the pandemic, Xinjiang region hosted over 2,000 people, including government officials, religious figures, and journalists from over 100 countries and international organizations. And they saw for themselves a Xinjiang that enjoyed peace, prosperity, and stability, where people of all ethnicities could enjoy the full freedom of religious belief. That is the true Xinjiang. Well, because the pandemic is still ongoing, so there are still restrictions about traveling. But once the situation improves, we welcome all interested people from other parts of the world to go to Xinjiang, and Xinjiang will be happy to have communications and exchanges with foreign friends. But one thing I want to make clear, that what Xinjiang does not welcome is investigation based on presumption of guilt. And the people in Xinjiang reject all kinds of biases, prejudices, and uncalled for accusations on relevant policy of China. As for Ms. Bachelet's visit to China, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Chairman, China long ago expressed its welcome to Ms. Bachelet and made clear that we welcome her visit, and she can also visit Xinjiang during the visit. There has never been a problem of that. That is just a normal exchange between China and international organizations. Well, right now we are communicating with Ms. Bachelet and his staff. We hope that we can come up with a thoughtful arrangement for her visit. Of course, we respect Ms. Bachelet's own wish, and we believe that when she is in China, she will respect China's sovereignty and rules and regulations. That is how exchanges take place in the world. We believe that when she comes to China, she will be able to see a developing China, and in Xinjiang, she will see a region that enjoys peace and stability, where people live in happiness and harmony. Fact is fact. In front of facts, all the lies, disinformation, and misinformation won't stand a chance and will be busted. This is my answer to the question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Minister Wang. Unfortunately, our time has run out. I'm sure there will be a number of more questions. Thank you for taking time to discuss these issues with us. It is my sincere hope that next year, post-pandemic, let's hope so, you could be here with us again physically and have bilateral meetings in addition, which I'm sure would be extremely interesting and useful to all of us. So let me thank you, and I look forward on behalf of my team and my successor to stay in touch with you, and thank you for your willingness to be open to all the questions that deal with our relationship with China. Thank you very much, sir.
Well, Chairman Ishinger, let me also thank you once again. I have been told that you are about to retire as chairman of the Munich Security Conference. Let me express my appreciation to you on behalf of the Chinese side, and thank you for your contribution to upholding peace and security of Europe, as well as to the enhanced mutual understanding between Europe and other parts of the world. I also salute your objective, just and inclusive position in your work, and I trust that you will continue to make greater contribution. I look forward to attending the conference physically next year. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned, so to speak. We're going.
China on the international stage, and live with us now is former China correspondent Astrid Freieisen. Astrid, thanks for being with us. What do you make of this statement by Wang Yi? We have difficulties hearing you, Astrid. I'm sure we're fixing that technical issue. Please stay tuned. We will be right back.
Diplomacy and dialogue may yet succeed. But we also have to be unflinchingly honest about the situation today, when over 130,000 Russian troops are gathering on the borders of Ukraine, and when more than 100 battalion tactical groups threaten that European country. We must be united against that threat, because we should be in no doubt what is at stake here. If Ukraine is invaded, and if Ukraine is overwhelmed, we will witness the destruction of a democratic state, a country that has been free for a generation, with a proud history of elections. And every time that Western ministers have visited Kiev, we've assured the people of Ukraine and their leaders that we stand foursquare behind their sovereignty and independence. How hollow, how meaningless, how insulting those words would seem if, at the very moment when their sovereignty and independence is imperiled, of elections. And every time that Western ministers have visited Kiev, we've assured the people of Ukraine and their leaders that we stand foursquare behind their sovereignty and independence. How hollow, how meaningless, how insulting those words would seem if, at the very moment when their sovereignty and independence is imperiled, we simply look away. If Ukraine is invaded, the shock will echo around the world. And those echoes will be heard in East Asia, they will be heard in Taiwan. When I spoke to the Prime Ministers of Japan and Australia this week, they left me in no doubt that the economic and political shocks will be felt on the far side of the world. So let me be clear about the risk. The risk now is that people would draw the conclusion that aggression pays and that might is right. So we should not underestimate the gravity of this moment and what is at stake. As I speak to you today, we do not fully know what President Putin intends, but the omens are grim, and that is why we must stand strong together. The UK has worked with the European Union and the United States to put together the toughest and strongest package of sanctions, and I spoke recently to President Ursula von der Leyen to discuss the measures prepared by the EU in closest coordination with our own. And If Russia invades its neighbor, we will sanction Russian individuals and companies of strategic importance to the Russian state. And we will make it impossible for them to raise finance on the London capital markets. And we will open up the matryoshka dolls of Russian-owned companies and Russian-owned entities to find the ultimate beneficiaries within. And if President Putin believes that by these actions he can drive NATO back or intimidate NATO, he will find that the opposite is the case. Already the UK and our allies are strengthening the defences of the eastern flank of NATO. We're increasing the British contribution to exercise cold response by sending our newest aircraft carrier, HMS Prince of Wales, and 3 Commando Brigade. We're doubling our presence in Estonia to nearly 2,000 troops. We've increased our presence in Poland to 600 troops by sending 350 Marines from 4-5 Commando. We've increased our presence in the skies over southeastern Europe with another 6 Typhoons based in Cyprus. We're sending warships to the eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And I've placed another 1,000 troops on standby to respond to any humanitarian emergency, which we all fear is increasingly likely. And while the most alarming and the most visible threat is the massing of Russian land forces on Ukraine's borders, look at the naval build-up in the Black Sea which threatens to blockade Ukraine. Look at the massive cyber attacks and the incoming tide of disinformation. This crisis extends into every domain, which is why the UK is providing NATO with more land, sea and air forces. And it is because we feared a crisis like this that we were already engaged in the biggest increase in defence investment for a generation, spread across conventional capabilities and the new technologies that are ever more important to our collective defence. And I'm proud to say that since Russia invaded Ukraine for the first time and annexed Crimea in 2014, we have been helping Ukraine, training 22,000 troops, and in recent months, in response to the threat, we have been among the nations to send defensive weaponry in the form of 2,000 anti-tank missiles. And I'm glad that we've been joined in this by the United States, by Poland, and by our Baltic allies. And that many other nations and the EU have, like the UK, helped to strengthen Ukraine's economy. Britain will always stand up for freedom and democracy around the world. And when I say that our commitment to European security is immovable and unconditional, our deeds show that we mean our words. We are making the biggest contribution of NATO to NATO of any European ally because we understand the importance of collective security. And just as our European friends stood by us after the Russian state used chemical weapons in Salisbury, used a chemical weapon in Salisbury, so Britain will stand by you. But we must accept that these measures by the UK and our allies, draconian sanctions, rinsing out dirty money, the intensification of NATO's defences, fortifying our Ukrainian friends, they may not be enough to deter Russian aggression. And it is therefore vital that we learn the lessons of 2014. Whatever happens in the next few days and weeks, we cannot allow European countries to be blackmailed by Russia. We cannot allow the threat of Russian aggression to change the security architecture of Europe. We cannot permit a new Yalta, a new division of our continent into spheres of influence. And we must now wean ourselves off dependence on Putin's oil and gas. And I understand the costs and the complexities of this effort and the fact that it is easier said than done. So I'm grateful to Chancellor Scholz's assurances about Nord Stream 2. But the lessons of the last few years and of Gazprom's obvious manipulation of European gas supply cannot be ignored. We must ensure that by making full use of alternative supplies and technology, we make Russia's threats redundant. And that will be the work of the months and years to come. as well as the necessary and overdue steps that we in the UK must take to protect our own financial system. And we now need to prepare ourselves for the Russian playbook of deception that governs every operation of this kind. There will be a cascade of false claims about Ukraine intended to spread confusion almost for its own sake. And even now there are plans being laid for staged events, spinning a web of falsehoods designed to present any Russian attack as a response to provocation. We've already witnessed a fake military withdrawal combined with staged incidents that could provide a pretext for military action. We knew this was coming. We've seen it before, and no one should be fooled. And we have to steel ourselves for the possibility of a protracted crisis, with Russia maintaining the pressure and searching for weaknesses over an extended period. And we must together refuse to be worn down. What Europe needs is strategic endurance, and we should focus our energies on preserving our unity and on deepening transatlantic cooperation. But for that to work, we must also be prepared to devote the necessary resources to carry a greater share of the burden of preserving our continent's security and to demonstrate that we are in it for the long haul. For now, we should continue to do everything we can to pursue the path of peace and dialogue. There is a way forward if President Putin is minded to take it. There is a discussion to be had about the threats that he claims to see, because in reality, as we all know, those threats are an illusion. They are the product of the Kremlin's chronic but misguided view of NATO as a supposedly encircling and intimidating alliance. That is not NATO's function. NATO is a peaceful and a defensive alliance. And we are willing to work with President Putin to demonstrate that point and to give him the assurances that he may need. We could point out that until he invaded Ukraine for the first time in 2014, NATO did not permanently station any troops anywhere east of Germany. And it was as recently as 2017 that the US, the UK, and other NATO allies established the enhanced forward presence to protect Poland and the Baltic states. And even then, the total deployment of fewer than 5,000 troops posed no conceivable threat to Russia. And it is only in the last few weeks, in response to the current crisis, that we have dispatched reinforcements, though still in numbers, that constitute no possible threat. Until 2014, European allies were cutting their defence budgets and shrinking their armed forces, perhaps faster than was safe or wise. And to the extent that this has changed, it is because of the actions of President Putin and the tension that he has created. If NATO forces are now closer to Russia's border, it is in response to his decisions and the justified concerns they have provoked among our allies. And there are many things said about what may or may not have been said in the closed-door meetings of 3 decades ago as the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunited. But there is no doubt that we all agreed legal obligations to protect the security of every country in Europe. And what happened in those amazing years was the dissolution of the Iron Curtain and the fulfillment of the vision of a Europe whole and free. It was one of the most incredible moments of my lifetime, as nations at the heart of our continent regained their liberty and their sovereign right to control their own destiny and seek their own alliances. We will not abandon the hope and impulse of that era, made possible by the courage of millions of ordinary Europeans. And that's why NATO opened its doors to 14 states after 1999, and we cannot allow our open door to be slammed shut. But if dialogue fails, and if Russia chooses to use violence against an innocent and peaceful population in Ukraine, and to disregard the norms of civilized behavior between states, and to disregard the Charter of the United Nations, then we at this conference should be in no doubt that it is in our collective interest that Russia should ultimately fail and be seen to fail. I believe that in preparing to invade Ukraine, a proud country whose armed forces now exceed 200,000 personnel, considerably more expert in combat today than in 2014, President Putin and his circle are gravely miscalculating. I fear that a lightning war would be followed by a long and hideous period of reprisals and revenge and insurgency. And Russian parents would mourn the loss of young Russian soldiers who in their way are every bit as innocent as the Ukrainians now bracing themselves for attack. And if Ukraine is overrun by brute force, I fail to see how a country encompassing nearly 250,000 square miles, the biggest nation in Europe apart from Russia itself, could then be held down and subjugated forever. After a generation of freedom, we're now staring at a generation of bloodshed and misery. I believe that Russia would have absolutely nothing to gain from this catastrophic venture and everything to lose. And while there is still time, I urge the Kremlin to de-escalate, to disengage its forces from the frontier and to renew our dialogue. Every nation at this conference shares a vision of a secure and prosperous Europe of sovereign states, deciding their own destiny and living without fear or threat. And that vision, of course, extends to Russia, a nation whose cultural patrimony we revere and whose sacrifice in the struggle against fascism was immeasurable. Russia has as much right as any other country to live in peace and security. And we should never cease to emphasize that Russia has nothing to fear from our vision, which threatens and marginalizes no one. And as we come together in unity and resolve, we must also show wisdom and moderation, because it's precisely by that unity that we show today that we have the best chance, even now, at this 11th hour, of averting disaster and ensuring that good sense can still prevail. And it is that message of unity that we must send from this conference today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. What a powerful statement at the end of this morning session here today. Thank you very much. We have only a couple of minutes left, but I'm actually grateful to you, speaking personally, for reminding us that this continent, which many of us have been dreaming of as a continent of peace, of eternal peace, has actually not been a continent of fully established peace, and whatever peace we've had is now under immediate and terrible threat. I think of the Balkans in the 1990s. I think of Georgia in the 2000s. I think of the war that's been going on now since 2014, the conflict in and around Ukraine. Now, here's my question. Given these challenges, of course, we work on the military aspects of deterrence, etc., very well in NATO. But should we not also strive to establish, or maybe I should say re-establish, a more efficient method regarding the closest possible cooperation between your government and the EU on, let's say, especially, of course, on the non-military aspects? There's such a need, as I think, of coordination, cooperation on all sorts of foreign policy aspects. What is your vision regarding the EU-UK relationship in the area of foreign policy?
Well, thanks very much, Wolfgang, and Ambassador Ishinger, I should say. But I want the closest possible cooperation across all aspects of policy, economic, political, diplomatic, military, and if you look at what we're doing in foreign policy coordination, I think it's fair to say that sometimes the UK has been out in front. I think maybe with sanctions on Belarus, we were a little bit ahead of our EU friends. But everything we do is always coordinated with Brussels. And when it comes to preparing the sanctions package against Russia, which has to be as tough as possible if it's going to make any difference to the calculations of Vladimir Putin, we've been working very closely with Ursula von der Leyen. I'll give you a couple more examples on Lithuania and the issue that they have currently with China. There, the UK stands four square with Lithuania and working with our EU friends. I'll just give you, another example of the way in which we continue to work very intensively together. A bit of tiny sort of shard of a fragment of good news is that it may be that the JCPOA has more life in it than we thought perhaps a few months ago. That's encouraging. This is an example of where the UK and the EU share completely the same objectives, work together hand in glove. So I think that there's ample continuity in our foreign policy coordination, basically because our values are the same. Our values and our objectives are the same. And it's about freedom, it's about democracy, it's about human rights, it's about liberty. And that's what's at stake today in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Final question. An hour ago or so, we had Vice President Harris speaking here, and I raised with